Hello, everyone. My name is Christopher Biss-Brown, and I'm curator for the Children's Literature Research Collection, which is part of the Special Collections Division at the Free Library of Philadelphia. This introduction had to be re-recorded due to technical issues, but thankfully, Jeanette Knazek's presentation was not affected. Before we get started, I have to do a little housekeeping, so please bear with me. And I get a chance to introduce you all to the Free Library of Philadelphia virtually. Our mission is to advance literacy, guide learning, and inspire curiosity. The library's vision is to build an enlightened community devoted to lifelong learning. We do that across 55 locations around the city of Philadelphia, and we host a variety of online services at www.freelibrary.org. If you're a citizen of Pennsylvania, if you own property in the city of Philadelphia, or if you pay Philadelphia city tax, you're eligible for a library card for free. At this time, cards are not available if you fall outside of those perimeters. But if you're visiting our Special Collections Division, you do not need a library card to access materials. These special collections enhance the Free Library of Philadelphia's educational mission by curating and making accessible historical materials, providing reliable and knowledgeable staff assistance, and offering instructional programs that encourage learning and critical thinking. Based out of Parkway Central, our special collections include the Children's Literature Research Collection, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a moment, the Fleischer Collection of Orchestral Music. This is the largest lending library of orchestral performance material in the world, and it has two sister collections, our Chamber Music Collection and the Drinker Collection of Choral Music. We also have our Map Collection, which houses more than 130,000 current and historical maps that cover every part of the world, and some parts of the world that don't exist, like fantastical places. We have our print and picture collection, which is home to a variety of graphic materials, including fine art prints, photographs, drawings, and artist books. It also houses a Philadelphiana collection, which contains over 20,000 images of Philadelphia, both historical and modern. Our rare book department is one of the largest and most diverse collections in a public library, and its holdings represent the history of written communication from ancient beginnings all the way to the present day. And our theater collection has a special focus on Philadelphia, but also contains research materials on the history of American theater, early film, and popular entertainment. The resources chronicle theater locally, and the playbill collection dates back to the early 1800s. Now, I'm going back to the Children's Literature Research Collection to tell you a little bit more about that. The Children's Literature Research Collection is one of the premier centers for the study of children's literature in the United States. The collection houses over 85,000 works of children's literature and an archive of original artwork, manuscripts, and ephemera. Some examples that you see on the screen below you include the works of Aliki, Angela Dominguez, Catherine Milhouse, and Marguerite D'Angeli. The Children's Literature Research Collection promotes the history, study, and development of children's literature. CLRC engages the public about the importance of children's literature in history and culture, expands the knowledge base of patrons through research support, and fosters new ideas through displays and exhibitions. You can learn more about our collection by visiting freelibrary.org/CLRC. Since we're discussing Tasha Tudor's mice, I hope you noticed that there was a mouse hidden on each of the previous slides. If you did, congratulations, you have superior detective skills. If you didn't, that's okay, you're watching this on YouTube. You can go back and rewind. But now, on to the presentation. Since the age of 5, Jeanette Chandler Knazek has admired the wide-ranging artistry of the late children's author and illustrator Tasha Tudor, whom she met for the first time at an Ohio book signing in 1976. A dedicated researcher and avid collector of all things Tasha, Jeanette has written many articles about the author-illustrator, most recently for the Tasha Tudor Society. As co-curator and lecturer for the Norman Rockwell Museum's traveling exhibition, Tasha Tudor Around the Year, Jeanette was also honored to curate the centenary celebration, Longings Fulfilled, Tasha at Home in New England for the Tasha Tudor Museum. With an academic background in psychology, nursing, and law, Jeanette spent much of her professional career teaching others, and now she enjoys sharing her knowledge and deep appreciation of Tasha during live presentations. So that being said, let's go back to that live presentation and watch it now. Thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure and a delight to be with you today to talk about Tasha Tudor's Christmas Mice. I consider that a little bit of an unusual title, but thanks to the free library, when I was visiting back in 2019, I got to see the one original watercolor from Tasha's first Christmas book, Snow Before Christmas, that was written in 1941. I had learned in the 1990s by seeing a photograph of Tasha donating the framed artwork to the Free Library. And that was in 1969 that she donated the watercolor. And I didn't have an opportunity, however, to see the watercolor in person until I visited the Free Library in 2019. And well, we're going to talk about that watercolor as well as her mice in various illustrations that she has done over the years.
Okay, and sorry to interrupt. I did see in the Q&A that the chat is disabled, and I'm trying to figure out how to enable it. I apologize. I don't want to take up time, and I apologize that I can't get that going.
Elaine, the other thing, if I could see a little bit more of the next slide coming up, you know, on the side. You had it, but it was a little bit high.
Oh, so do you mean when hold on, when I exit the full screen?
Right.
From here.
Yes. And yes, so that's great. That's great. We just need to back up to the slide before.
Let me see if this works. Okay, we can do the presentation in here as long as it doesn't bother people to have it on the side like that.
I see what you're saying. No, you know what? No, let's have full screen and then I'll just tell you next and then we'll go from there. I think that's going to be better for everyone to be able to see the full image. Okay. All right, we'll go to the next one. And I did want to mention the Tasha Tudor Society. As Lane said, I've had the honor and privilege of writing a number of articles for the Tasha Tudor Society. And its mission is to inspire and connect people through the world, created by author, illustrator, and early American lifestyle icon Tasha Tudor. I basically have that mission statement memorized, except right now. And I thank the society for the opportunities they're giving all of us to get to know Tasha better, to get to know each other better, and to spread the joy, especially of this season, through her artwork and stories. Interestingly enough, Tasha named her first newspaper, it was a weekly newspaper, the Sunday Mouse, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But what was so exciting for me was to see the original watercolor for Snow Before Christmas that the Free Library owned. Next. This is a fairly early photograph of Tasha shortly after she began her illustration and writing career. And you don't often see Tasha in something other than a skirt, but as you can see, the snow is pretty deep and well, at least for the geese. And she is wearing some type of trousers or overalls. But those who know her in later years, she is wearing a cape as she did when she got older. And this is a photograph by her good friend, Nell Dorr, the famed photographer who authored a number of photographic essays, including Mother and Child, in which Tasha and some of her family appeared. Next. We're still not quite on the right slide. I'm sorry. I don't know why. But in January of 1941, Tasha wrote a letter to Nell as she was staying at Nell's home for a brief period of time. Her first child, Bethany, had been born, and she does talk about Bethany. But what I was so struck by, and by the way, this letter is in the Amon Carter Museum of American Art archives. And what she had to say was about the newest book that she was writing. Next. Oh, Nell, I am so pleased. Here by your fire, I have written one of the nicest wee stories and am now hard at work with the illustrations. I know I will be able to finish it in time, which is a relief. I want so to have you read the story and see the drawings that I have done. Only you would get the particular feeling I try to express, that feeling of old things, rustling skirts, little mouse shadows running beneath the dresser and candlelight. What I found amazing about this is that to read her thoughts, Tasha's thoughts about what she was intending to convey in her text and in her drawings and watercolors was just fascinating. And I should say that Snow Before Christmas is a full color book, and it was Tasha's second holiday book. Earlier in 1941, A Tale for Easter was published, but this was Tasha's first published Christmas book. Next. Because the letter that Tasha wrote was on one sheet of paper, but she divided it into 4 pages, I could not show you, unless I pieced it together, all the text, but this gives you an opportunity to see how Tasha's handwriting appeared in 1941. And again, the little mouse shadows running beneath the dresser. Next. This is the dust jacket illustration for the front of the dust jacket for Snow Before Christmas. Before the internet, it was very difficult for collectors to find a copy of this that they could purchase. I know for myself that it took quite a number of years to not only find a copy, but also to be able to afford it. Now this, so this is the dust jacket front design. There are no mice here. And we go to the title page, the next slide. And well, there are birds, but there are still no mice. However, we move along. And now this on the left is the illustration that the Free Library owns the original watercolor of. And this is the second page of text and the second illustration in the book itself. What struck me was how mice were scampering through the walls. But as I did a closer examination of this watercolor, I was completely surprised by 2 mice. Next. And I'm sorry, this is how it appears in archival format with protection for the corners and to have it stabilized. And you can see it the one thing I noticed was how much brighter the colors were, the green of the socks that were being knitted, the blue of the girl's dress, and even the color of the apples, much more bright and vibrant. And you can see, again, the background above the settle which looks very dark in even a first printing of the book. But here you can really see the dried herbs as well as the items that are on the mantle much more easily. Next. And here are the mice. They've been circled for you to be able to see them, as well as the inset at the lower left, which gives you an idea of exactly where they appear on the printed page. When Chris and I both looked at this together, he did wonder if there was a third, and I very carefully examined this for quite a while. And the decision we agreed upon was that there was no third mouse. Next. And this is the photograph I mentioned earlier. Tasha, on May 12, 1969, gave this framed watercolor to Carolyn Field. And those of you who know the Free Library's history know that Carolyn Field was instrumental and a long-time employee of the Free Library. Next. This is a newspaper clipping from the next day, the Philadelphia Evening Bulletin. And it was written by Katrina Dyke on the staff. And I am happy to report that with a little bit of skills on my own, I was able to find Katrina. And we did have a discussion about what she remembered from that day. And well, she was fascinated by Tasha, her lifestyle, talking about the type of animals she had, and then of course Edgar Allan Crow, the pet crow back at her home in New Hampshire that stole the windshield wipers from visitors' cars. So this was the photograph, as far as I have been able to determine, did not accompany the article in the newspaper, but it gave a really good idea of what she was thinking and saying that time. She said, I really only wrote my books to get my illustrations published, but those of you who are aware of how many books she did write as well as illustrate, you know that she had quite a bit of talent for a delightful story, often with humor, and definitely had a great skill in drawing children, adults, animals, and birds. We can go on. Next. For the book, Tasha chose mice for all 4 of the end paper designs. And a few years ago, 2 of these original illustrations were sold at auction. And what I am going to show you is that there is a difference, a significant difference in color, clarity of line, between the first printing books illustrations and the original artwork. And it gives a person who's never had an opportunity to study original artwork how even with often the best printing techniques, or in this case, not as good printing techniques, that there is still a significant difference between the original artwork and the printed illustration. Next. So this is the second end paper design. This is not the original. The first one I showed you was. And we're seeing a definite shift in color, indefinite lines. You can see there's a fair amount of fading of some of the grasses. And this, frankly, was inevitable for a lot of printing of children's books in the 1940s. Not all, but even for Oxford University Press, who published, the company that published Tasha's illustrations and books for a long time, it wasn't all that unusual to have a difference such as this. Next. And this is the third end paper, and this is the original artwork. And again, you can see more of the lines, actually even more of her shadowing techniques. And certainly there's a clarity of the ink lines that she used, the mouse's ears, etc. Next. And this is the this is the fourth end paper illustration, and this is what we all say is off register. Your eyes are not blurry. It is the screen, unfortunately. That even with a first printing, you could get a problem where the registration of the colors weren't always totally lined up, and you would get almost what I consider a second line, and making you feel as if you're seeing double. I did want to point out in this that Tasha did do little shadowy paw prints in the foreground. Okay, next. Now this is the first illustration and the first page of text in the book. At this time, Tasha was living in Connecticut, and it has been said that her parents-in-law's house was used as a model for this image. You can see Tasha paid a lot of attention to the tree branches. And again, her study of light and shadow has always been good right from the beginning of her career. And as you'll see in the text, well, it was an old house full of mouse holes and mouse runs and woodpecker holes. And the other point that I wanted to stress was how Tasha was intermingling imagination, fantasy, along with the reality of having mice in an old house. Next. Mice ran everywhere. And this is one of the first illustrations, and frankly, there aren't that many in the book that do show the mice, but because a lot of the book actually has to do with looking forward to Christmas from the viewpoint of the children in the story, Seth, Bethany, and Muffin. So these two are in the bedroom, and Tasha knew very well about the storehouses that mice would set in various places, especially in an old house. Next. Well, Granny got pretty upset when going into the flour barrel, a mouse jumped out. And this is quite an action shot of our mouse making his escape. Next. Near the end of the book, here are some skirts that are definitely rustling. And what was, to me, darling was that the fact that the mice were frightened into silence. And we'll go ahead. Next. I'm going now to go back a ways to the beginning of Tasha's career, and actually before it a bit, to show how she remembered mice, thought about mice, and illustrated them. Next. This, I'm happy to say, is the original newspaper titled The Sunday Mouse. For a couple of winters back in the 1920s, Tasha, with the help of a friend or two, wrote an informative and interesting newspaper. This is all done in pencil, and it was actually meant to inform her mother of the goings-on while her mother was away. At the age of 9, approximately thereof, Tasha began to live with friends in Connecticut while her mother after a divorce from her husband, went to New York City and lived because she was a portraitist, and New York City was the place for artists to be. This particular newspaper is now in the collection of the de Grummond Children's Literature Collection in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, at the University of Southern Mississippi. And there are some other newspapers, which I actually am now researching. These just came to the collection this year. Next. Back in the 1980s, there was a large sale conducted by Doris Fronsdorf of many of the items owned originally by Ned Hills, who was an English professor in Pennsylvania and a very good longtime friend of Tasha. He sadly passed away in the late 70s, and his family decided to offer a fair number of the pieces of artwork, books, various items, much ephemera that Ned Hills owned. This is the sale catalog for an item that Tasha had done in 1938, illustrating Robert Burns' poem To a Mouse. And it was, as far as I know, sold during the sale. And I have never had the opportunity to see it and would love that opportunity. But at least we have this record and fairly detailed description of her illustrating To a Mouse. Next. Well, this is from Tasha's first published book, Pumpkin Moonshine, which was actually meant as a Christmas present to her young niece in England. But Tasha was interested in illustrating children's books, and she was encouraged to write her own story. Well, when she did, she decided maybe I should show this to various publishers. And this was the beginning of her long and wonderful career. I got the biggest charge out of the fact that even though there's not a mouse that appears anywhere in Pumpkin Moonshine, Wiggy, the dog here, Sylvie Ann's dog, looks at the mouse hole and has a pretty good idea that there's something on the other side. Next. Alexander the Gander was Tasha's second published book in 1939. And again, this is not a story about mice. However, in her is what they call historiated initials, the illustrated letter beginning her text on this page, there is a mouse. And we take a closer look next. And again, we can see that even though it is a mouse at the top, we also are dealing with an illustration that is off register. And you also can see the dots of the ink. So in a way, this is actually a good study. And I should point out, this is much more of a naturalistic illustration of a mouse, even though it's sitting on top of a letter. It is among toadstools, dried grasses, and a little snail up on almost at the height of the mouse. Next. The County Fair was Tasha's third published book, published in 1940. And I should say that all of Tasha's books up until the early 1950s were published by Oxford University Press. Next. Interestingly enough, even though this book is about the county fair that children and family go to see and visit, there is another illustration, this time on the back of the dust jacket. And this time the mouse is on the toadstool or mushroom. And to me, that looks like it's a cricket or a dragonfly over on the right. I think that if we had a little bit better registration, we'd have a good idea what type of insect is there. Next. Tasha often dedicated her books and this one was for a young girl named Rosamond, but not her mother's name, which is the same, Rosamond. And now we have mice that are getting pretty close to something that they can eat. Next. Again, within the story itself, there really isn't much action with mice, but for whatever reason, Tasha decided to offer 6 historiated initials that featured mice. And this is the first one. And it is atop the letter A. And you can see in the background various items having to do with filling out an entry blank. Next. And this is a close-up, a little bit better registration. And then next. It's one of 6 in the book. Some are more naturalistic than others, and all having to do something with the text. But a couple of times, Tasha also decided to just put in a little bit more of nature. Next. Tale for Easter, I had mentioned earlier. This is Tasha's first holiday book in printed form and published form. And there is a little mouse on this dust jacket design. And give you just a moment to see if you can see it yourself. But depending on what the size of your monitor is, you may not be able to see it. So next. It is at the lower right, next to the rabbit and below the flowers, right? Basically in the corner of the illustration. Next. This is from Dorcas Porcus, and this book was published in 1942 about a rather naughty pig, but a beloved member of the family. And this is when it was decided that Dorcas needed a bath. And the mice that are illustrated here, they're just checking out the soap. They're not so sure it's something they want to eat. Next. And again, here's the close-up. And sometimes Tasha would either show a little bit of excitement by having some lines in front of the nose, or it would be an extension of the mice's whiskers. And sometimes they actually did serve both functions. Next. And here, I thought this was interesting, and actually a foreshadowing of some of the action paralleling what's happening in a larger illustration and then a smaller illustration. Dorcas is running right through the middle of the quilting party, and the mouse is running off of the letter J into the grasses. Next. And again, a bit off register, but at the same time, we can see that this mouse is on the move. Next. This is another illustrated letter from, and that's another term that people use. Historiated indicates that there is actually a story going on or a scene. So either one can be used, but historiated is more the technical term. Another snail, and this time the mouse is separated from it. Next. 1943, Tasha did an extraordinary thing that she illustrated this book basically all in blue. Some people call it her blue period, which only lasted basically this one book. However, throughout her career, some of her beautiful blues, frankly, I think match those that many people discuss when they think of Maxfield Parrish. This book was actually dedicated to Nell Dorr, her friend and fellow New Hampshireite. There were years where Nell and her family lived also not that far from Tasha in New Hampshire. And here is another example of a more naturalistic scene. And this time there are two mice in it. One on the left on the rock at the bottom and one on the right. Not quite blending in with the scene, but definitely part of the action. Next. And I enlarged this one to give you an idea. Again, those little lines, but Tasha knew her animals, and she was very well acquainted with field mice, deer-footed mice, if you will. There's a few different names for those up in New England. And throughout her career, there would be times where she did illustrate chipmunks, flying squirrels. And in preparing for this presentation, there were a few times where I almost had to make a judgment call on what exactly I was looking at, only because of the size of the illustration as it appeared in a book or on a dust jacket. Next. Now, this is one actually of the end paper designs. She did include a mouse. Each of the 4 end paper illustrations features a different animal or bird. And this time she's showing a mouse. And she's added some oak leaves, which, as you know, will stay on the ground through the winter. And the grasses that she knew very well. One of the earliest works that she did unpublished was a compendium of New England wildflowers that she did a few years before Pumpkin Moonshine was published in 1938. Go next. Another illustration from White Goose. Now the oak leaves are flying and the mouse is paying a bit of attention to what is happening above. Next. Okay, now in 1944, we come to Tasha's first Caldecott Honor book, which was, of course, was awarded the next year in 1945. This was the first book that Tasha did for Oxford University Press that contained both color and black and white illustrations. It's a fairly large book, 77 verses, and it was alternating 2 pages of color with 2 pages of black and white. This is the dust jacket design, and you can see the 3 mice in the lower left section. And Tasha decided for her dust jacket illustration, she would repeat some of the basic designs from inside the book, but they're variations. They are not what appears in the book. And 3 blind mice is what the nursery rhyme is, to which those 3 blind mice there are running, but they have their tails at this point. Next. And this is a close-up. And again, you can see a little bit of separation of the colors. Those mice really didn't have green backs. Next. This is an illustration that I won't say will live in infamy, but Tasha even herself mentioned to me that she was told that the reason she did not win the Caldecott Medal for 1945 was because of this illustration. And obviously, the farmer's wife is holding the 3 tails, and the mice are running away without their tails. And of course, she's being very true to the nursery rhyme. And it's unfortunate frankly, that we were in wartime. And in 1944, the world had been dealing with war for a number of years. And a lovely book, A Prayer for a Child, was awarded the Caldecott Medal. But for those of us who have loved Mother Goose for all these years, and those who eventually will have a chance to enjoy Tasha's illustrations for this book, we wish that this is when she would have won the medal. Next. I'm showing this. I know this is a rat. Tasha knew this was a rat, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to see a black and white illustration with a little bit of action with Humpty Dumpty and the creature that was about as big as an egg. Next. There are two illustrations, both black and white in the book, that mention mice, but Tasha chose not to illustrate mice. And I just thought you'd like to see her rendition of Hickory Dickory Dock. The mouse not only ran down, it's not in the picture. Next. And Pussycat, Pussycat, where have you been? A little mouse was caught under the chair, but we don't see exactly what happened to it here. I wanted to point out too is that Tasha's love of pewterware and various kitchen implements shines through all her books where she's depicting an interior domestic scene, especially the kitchens, dining room, hearth side. And this gives you a good idea of how well she was able to detail various items, especially earlier in her career. Next. This is one of 3 illustrations I've chosen from Tasha's edition of Fairy Tales from Hans Christian Andersen, published in 1945. This book, again, we were near the end of World War II, and paper was rather, it wasn't as high quality. There was a problem with the shortage of paper, but this is a very thick book considering only a handful of color illustrations, but there are chapter headings in black and white. Tasha chose to do these in pencil, although in some other books she had done pen and ink. This is for Soup from a Sausage Stick. And this is the Mouse King's Banquet. So we're seeing a lot of little beady eyes here. Next. Now, I chose to show you this. This is the Elf Hill. Elfin Hill is another title for this story. And I read this carefully, and I know that the creature to the right, well, at the far left here, that is a rat. But the reason I decided to show you this was that Tasha read her stories carefully. There were times where she decided to take a little bit more poetic license in her illustration. And she was pretty good in this book about being faithful to what the story was saying. The food that was served at this banquet included some items made with some portions of mice. So that's why I became convinced that she would not put a mouse at the table. And if you look carefully at the creature at the far left, it definitely looks more like a rat instead of a mouse. Next. But we are now back to a field mouse. Sleeping at the left, Thumbelisa is the title of this, although many of us know it as Thumbelina. And the field mouse, the fine lady at the left, took in Thumbelisa. And for a while, she was hoping, the field mouse was hoping that their neighbor, this mole in a velvet coat, would marry Thumbelisa. It didn't happen, but right now we have a very hopeful mole. And again, look at the details of all the different items on the mantle, including a snail shell and an acorn at the upper right. Next. I decided to show this illustration because it is one of the color illustrations from, it's actually for the fir tree in Fairy Tales from Hans Christian Andersen. And although there is not a mouse anywhere to be found, I thought this was a nice opportunity to let you see what Tasha was illustrating in terms of a holiday tree and the tradition of dancing around a Christmas tree is more of a Scandinavian tradition, but of course, with Hans Christian Andersen being from Scandinavia with Danish, that she chose to show the dancing. Next. The last of Tasha's 5 calico books was Linsey Woolsey in 1946. Calico, so called because when Tasha made her first book that was shown to various publishers, it was covered in calico cloth. And then when Oxford published the books, all of them were in a polka dot design cloth. And so the calico name stuck, and it actually was used in advertising. So Linsey Woolsey was about, well, a little lamb, but a little bit on the naughty side. And this is the one illustration that features a mouse from the book. Next. I'm sorry, 2. There were 2 there. I'm sorry. That's my fault. One is trying to get into the basket. One is atop the letter T. Next. And this was from 1947 edition of A Child's Garden of Verses. Again, this had a lot more pencil drawings than color illustrations. But what I found interesting in later years, Tasha did a full color version of A Child's Garden of Verses by Stevenson. And she illustrated quite a number of poems with mice. And I'm going to leave that to you to find them all, but I was astonished at how many mice Tasha put into the illustrations. But this is referring to a line in Night and Day. And now this time the mouse is underneath the mushrooms. Next. 1950, Tasha illustrated The Doll's Christmas, and this was about 2 dolls owned by two lovely young girls, and preparations for having a Christmas party for the dolls. And one of the activities was a string puppet show, and here you can see Red Riding Hood. And although a mouse does not show up in any of the illustrations, the very small elephant at the lower right, looking a little bit sort of bluish green, was left behind inadvertently after the party was over, but had a fine opportunity to have discussions with the mice at the house. Next. In 1952, Tasha began illustrating prayer books, and this is the first from the first one, First Prayers. And what I wanted to give you the opportunity to see was she definitely knew her birds, and there's quite a number of different birds in the border here, as well as one very reverent mouse looking up at the babe in the manger. Next. 1957, Tasha illustrated Around the Year. And I chose to show you one of the December illustrations. The book had 4 pages devoted to each month of the year, 2 in color, 2 in black and white, and they were pencil drawings. A number of years ago, I participated in a seminar in which I discussed the Advent calendar that is shown in this illustration. And Tasha was very aware of the world around her, even though she enjoyed paying more of attention to the past in her life, in terms of lifestyle and what she enjoyed to do. That this particular Advent calendar was the first German Advent calendar made available to the US market, and it was called Little Town. And what I found really fascinating was that Tasha depicted this Advent calendar with such detail that if you, and you can go online and look for it, you can see that she very faithfully replicated the design to include in this book of hers. And I've mentioned this in other talks, and people are also aware of this in different ways. But this book, Tasha was inspired by the classic movie Friendly Persuasion, starring Gary Cooper and Dorothy McGuire. Tasha and her daughter Bethany went every night for a week to the local movie theater to watch this particular movie. And so the setting for many of the illustrations in the book are definitely from the Civil War period. Next. And this is an active scene with 2 running mice at the lower border. And I will say that there are a few other mice in the book, and I'll leave that to you to find. One point about later illustrations, I wrote an Amazon review once of this book when it came out, I believe in 2001, and I was delighted that it was back in print. But what I found out was that it was not faithfully reproduced. And many of the details, particularly of her pencil drawing illustrations, you couldn't see very well. And I've learned over the years that, yes, we're happy to see books back in print, especially these days. But at the same time, to get a good feel for what an illustrator's work is, often you do have to go back to earlier printings or earlier editions. However, that's not a rule across the board. There are times where new plates are made, or they have better reproduction techniques, and you are able to enjoy a much more recently published book as it appeared in earlier days. Next. I'm going to jump around a little bit now. Tasha illustrated A Visit from St. Nicholas, or 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, or The Night Before Christmas, 5 different times. 2 were in anthologies and 3 were freestanding publications. Next. So The Night Before Christmas, I think, is what many of us are more familiar with. And as you'll see, Tasha did illustrate with that name more often. Next. In 1960, Tasha was invited with 2 other illustrators to do an anthology of poems. And this was a portion of Tasha's 2-page, it's a rather large book, 2-page spread of the entire poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas. When Tasha did the original illustrations for this, She did give this to a friend of hers, and she did handwrite the entire poem within the blank areas of the 2 pages of artwork. The house at the lower left is the Red House, or Tasha's home, her 1789 farmhouse in New Hampshire, near Concord, New Hampshire. And I've shown you only a portion of this because I wanted to give you an idea of how detailed her borders were. I could go on about the different elements here, but we're going to focus on, of course, the mice. And if you've been looking at this for a moment, you might see that there is a mouse. Again, atop a letter, but a little bit more of the scene, the T of visit. And next. This is an enlargement of the mouse on top of the T, as well as the mouse that is at the lower right corner of the first page of the 2-page poem. Next. Just 2 years later, Tasha was asked to do a miniature version of The Night Before Christmas now. And of course, it's still the same poem, but this shows one of the 2 mice that Tasha depicted. This is on the frontispiece, the page opposite the title page. Next. A little bit less naturalistic than the first illustration, but we still have a mouse. It's in items that normally you would see outside, the mistletoe and the holly, but curled up just the same as the one on the frontispiece. Here is another mantle scene, but I look carefully, no mice there. Next. 1967, Tasha was asked to do another series of poems, another anthology, First Poems of Childhood. And interestingly enough, for this one, Tasha started right off the bat with the sleeping mouse in his abode. And I got the biggest kick out of this. Our calendar is given by Caleb Cheese Company, I'm assuming. And again, you can see that Tasha has employed various elements in her rather lavish border, including kugels, which are antique glass ornaments, of which Tasha inherited a very large collection from one of her great-grandparents. Next. I chose to show the title page instead of the dust jacket, well, the front cover design of Tasha's 1975 full-size Night Before Christmas book. And obviously the reason for that is that there are 2 dancing mice down below her name. And here the mice have little bows on their tails. And I'll be talking about that again later. Next. Not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. And this, for the first time, and you can see some similarities to her 1967 illustration, but again, we do have the mouse, now this time below the floorboards in its house. And not only do we have stairs coming down, we have a storehouse behind the wall. And we also have a table set up for tea. And Tasha loved tea every day, and it was part of her daily ritual. Next. This is a close-up. And I believe she had, in the storehouse is corn and wheat. Tasha, again, always paid a lot of attention to detail, and this is no exception. One other item I wanted to point out to you is it looks as if There is a basket or a bowl full of apples next to the tree, but we know they can't be the kinds of apples that you and I eat. But there is a little bit of a design there, and I'm assuming it might be very, very small berries or seeds. Next. Now, this is where things get to be fun. We have the gentleman being awakened by such a clatter that he arose from his bed to see what was the matter. Now, the mice aren't quite where they were before, obviously. There's a little hole there, and we know about mouse runs in a house, but they were a bit disturbed by what the man was doing upstairs, running towards the window. And I'm not sure what happened here, that there's a ladder instead of stairs, but the mice have decided to find out what is going on up there. Next. Now this is where things even get to be more fun, that Tasha has decided that there's going to be a gift for the cat. And it's a catnip mouse made with pink calico cloth. And this is the cat's first opportunity to see what Santa is bringing him, or Saint Nick is bringing him. Next. Quite a number of joyful scenes in the book, and this is one of the most fun, that everyone is dancing. And the mouse is not one to be shy. It's dancing along with everyone else. And of course, since the cat is playing the violin, the fiddle, that we can't have the mouse and the cat together in this scene. In the lower right, we also have two other dancing mice. Next. This is a close-up to show you that these two mice don't have any bows on their tails, but you can see the calico mouse is having a good time. Next. This is at the end of the book, and I chose to show a detail. So you are not seeing what is the entire spread of Corgi Cottage, which is the home that Tasha's son built for her in Vermont in the early 1970s. This is the first book in which we get to see both the interior and the exterior of Corgi Cottage to such a large extent. A little bit earlier in 1973, Tasha did do an interior design of Corgi Cottage, but it was for a published illustrated Christmas card. And again, the mouse is left behind with the cat, and we can see that we have a tiny Saint Nick and some of the tiny reindeer that are mentioned in the poem. Next. In 1999, Tasha decided to do a large format, full color version of The Night Before Christmas, A Visit from St. Nicholas. This has a lot more mice in it in the lower border, and this has all the pages have an oval framed format. I wanted to give you an idea of what we're seeing, including a little mouse up on the mantle again. But we have two at the bottom, getting pretty close to what has been left for Santa. Next. This is a almost strange illustration by Tasha. It's otherworldly. She deliberately depicted the mice and the tree in white. I've had different ideas about this, that it's to be giving you an idea of the fantasy portion of the book and the topic of the book, along with the idea that that things can look differently from what they really are. So I'll leave that to you to discuss and consider. Next. Again, we have an outdoor scene. Tasha did use some similar design elements from her 1970 book, and I think it's because she loved what she did for that book as much as we all loved it. And in the bottom area, you can see that mice are running. Um, I I thought, well, those tails will look a little bit thick for me. And indeed, I would posit that perhaps these aren't uh, mice, but I like the design so much showing the action. I thought, well, I'll show this too. Next. Ah, now we're getting to where the mice are beginning to enjoy their Christmas celebration. And here we have a rounded cheese with a large slice already taken from it. Next. And now we're getting a chance to see how they're celebrating below the floorboards. A lot more exuberance in this particular scene, which is it's really fun to see Tasha having fun herself in putting in so much activity into such a small area. Got quite a number of busy mice here. And if you'll notice, we also have a little bird who's helping out. And not that far from the cheese at the left. Next. And with Tasha's lovely corgis enjoying the company of Saint Nick, the mice are thinking about coming in to join some of the experience above, the activity above the floorboards. And again, you can see that there's actually an acorn or two down there. So we have a mixture of naturalism as well as fantasy. And Tasha knows how to juxtapose the two very well. Next. Just again, wanted to show you a bit more detail. I had the opportunity, and those of you who saw the 1999 Colonial Williamsburg exhibition, in which all the original artwork for Tasha's 1999 Night Before Christmas were on display. I would sometimes notice that it seemed as if her use of highlighting really didn't look right. It looked very unusual or unattractive. And what I found was when I saw the original illustrations that it all actually blended together much better. And I'm assuming it had to have something to do with the reproduction, the photographic technique used. But it was something like the two small white areas for the underside of the mice really blended much better when I saw the original illustrations in person. Next. One of the items that Tasha often had for celebrating Christmas was a Noah's Ark. And now, right now, a lot of the animals are coming out of the Ark to enjoy the Christmas celebration. And the mice are running in to enjoy it with them. Next. There's a really lovely Christmas card illustration from the 1950s in which these types of donuts are hanging outside for the benefit of the birds, for them to enjoy a special treat at Christmas. But here, the corgis and the mice are all enjoying donuts that look exactly the same, but I imagine they're fresher. Next. And this is when Saint Nick is putting his finger to the side of his nose. And this particular mouse at the right, almost looking as if it wants to hitch a ride. And I thought it was charming that she added that detail. Next. We're going to move backwards a bit and then go forward. In the 1960s, Tasha illustrated some books that I wanted to bring to your attention that in which mice appeared. Next. Becky's Christmas. This is a lovely book illustrated in the early 1960s, and up at the upper left corner there, you can see a cornucopia next to a stocking. Cornucopias were made of paper and something that Tasha and her family enjoyed making for Christmas. And then they would put candy, fudge, clear toys, various edible items that were treats into the cornucopia. And right above the handle there is a mouse thinking about entering the cornucopia. Thank you. We're going to move along. Next. In this book, Tasha's end papers were actually advent calendars and with very lavish borders. And I wanted to show you that this one is a little bit more of a natural outdoor scene, even though there's a post office in the tree trunk. And just to the left of the door, next, is actually a letter slot. And one mouse is in the slot, helping the other mouse get the envelope into the slot. Next. This is the other end paper, Corgi's Candy Shop. And this wasn't all that long after Corgis came to be part of Tasha's life. Next. And this is the close-up. Had to look for this one. The mouse is at the top of the barrel and is quite interested in what the Corgis are making, the edible items on the table. Next. In the book, it's decided that the cat should get a Christmas present. And again, this is before Tasha's 1975 Night Before Christmas. And a calico mouse is being made. Next. There's a few scenes outdoors, and this is one of them where the mouse is venturing outside to get some seeds. Next. One of the family scenes, and the only indication of a mouse that I found was the mouse hole at the lower right. But this gives you an idea of how Tasha's artwork was looking in the early 60s. Next. Finally, the cat gets its present and is delighted with it. Next. Also in the early 1960s, Tasha illustrated a catalog, and this was not meant for publication, but in the 1980s, Jenny Wren Press did reproduce this for the public to enjoy. And this was, the title was Mouse Mill's Catalog for Spring. And inside was this little illustration. And for those of you familiar with Beatrix Potter, you might recognize a similar design from Taylor, from the Taylor from Gloucester. And I will say that Tasha enjoyed immensely when she was at the Free Library, looking through the Beatrix Potter original artwork and other items that were held and are held at the Free Library. Next. Another page from the catalog, The Holly and the Ivy, and we have dancing mice along with the caroling people. And there's a stuffed bear animal and a Bogart and a stuffed duckling. And we'll leave those for another time. Next. This was an interesting item that I found. In the 60s, Tasha and her daughter, Bethany, designed a full page, 8.5 by 11 page of various small card illustrations for the Sparrow Post, which was the system by which her dolls communicated with other dolls and stuffed animals. And there was one mouse on the page. It was in sepia ink. The entire page is in sepia. And I chose to show you how Genuine Press was also included, but the page did include portions of envelopes as well as the designs. Next. 1966, Tasha did one of what I consider her best works, Take Joy, the Tasha Tudor Christmas book. And this is one of the end paper designs. Again, a mouse is featured within a wreath. And I'm going to show you now another earlier, much earlier illustration that Tasha did. Next. For the famed movie and stage star Lillian Gish. This was designed for Lillian's Christmas card. And again, you can see a wreath. And this is a design in which you see Lillian Gish as she would appear on stage. And note the dark gloves. Next. Around the same time, here's a young photo of Tasha and with similar gloves on. The Lillian Gish card is not dated per se, but I estimate it to be had been done in the mid to late 1930s. Next. From Take Joy, the dedication page, and there is a little mouse in the upper left curved area. And I think that this is just a good idea of where she will put in whimsical features into her designs. Next. In the same year, 1966, Tasha also illustrated Kenneth Graham's classic, The Wind in the Willows. And, but earlier in the, that she also decided to do another rendition for Take Joy of the Fir Tree. And these are the two mice that are listening to the fir tree talk about his experiences. Next. So, and I'm sorry, I think I might have gone ahead of myself there. So in 1966, with her doing The Wind in the Willows, she drew this gorgeous drawing of caroling field mice who came to the mole's house. And for Take Joy, Tasha's illustration for the book, Wind in the Willows, was duplicated. Next. These are just some examples of how Tasha places mice into prominent spots, but in borders. Next. And sometimes they interact with what is going on with the main illustration, or perhaps looking on. It's plausible that a mouse would be watching this scene because it involves edible food, but at the same time, it's really separated from the scene of the boy and the corgi. Next. This is just simply a close-up. Tasha once said that she was afraid that in the end, she would, the only thing she'd really be remembered for would be her borders. Well, I think that's fine because her borders are just wonderful. Often she would use twig borders that started in the 1950s. Next. Another illustration, and in this we're talking about the mouse, and being with the doll at the doll's Christmas, and the presents are not opened yet, but except for the one that's on the little doll's lap, and the mouse is interested in finding out if there's food there. Next. Another design of a border, and this time the mouse is pretty content with what is in its paws. Next. Often you'll see mice in Tasha's illustrations near stockings, near something that the mouse might be interested in taking back to its family. And this was the illustration for the index of the book. Next. And this is the color illustration for the about the author page. This is, I have seen the original. It's much clearer again in person, but this is also magnified quite a bit. Next. We're going to quickly go through her Advent calendars and the books that she did having to do with Advent. Next.
Jeanette, would it be okay for me to interject just for a second?
Yes.
So we're coming up on time right now. We have about 3 minutes left. I wanted to give everyone an opportunity, if they have a question that they would like to pose right now, to put it in the Q&A in case people have to leave at 2:30, and they will be answered via email, since everyone provided that in order to register for this event. So feel free to put it in the Q&A, and like I said, we can answer that later. And then Jeanette, about how much more time, just so the participants have an idea?
I must admit, probably a couple more minutes than 3, but I will, this portion I expected to go more quickly through because more people are probably interested in what we've already covered. But this is, to me, an important part of her work. So we'll go through it fairly quickly.
Okay.
Thank you. Beginning in 1978, Tasha was invited to do commercially produced Advent calendars, and these had a number of folds so they could stand on their own. You're seeing the 1978, 1980, and 1982 editions in their folded form as they would be appearing in a bookstore. Next. I chose just to show how many mice were in her first Advent calendar, and I'm not going to show what's behind some of the doors and windows, but she did often put mice into them as well. We have all sorts of activities here, and it was a lot of fun seeing how many activities Tasha decided to depict with mice. Next. This is a close-up, and you can see we've got like 2 different levels of below ground, and both are very active, and this is something that is worth examining it. But again, here the bows are on the tails. Next. And this is the middle section. And again, we have a tree, but now it's become a tea house, but you have to go below the ground into basically the root system. But there are a lot of open areas, and they have a wonderful hearth. And there are mice in various portions of that scene. Next. And the close-up, we have the storehouse, and the mice look to be behaving themselves and not taking too much away for themselves. Next. And this is the right 2 panels. There would be a fold through the middle there vertically for it to stand. And we've got a continuation of the 2 levels. And you can see that mice are actually bringing in some little barrels. I will say they are cider. Next. And the close-up, and we've got some boisterous raccoons, but there is a warning in their area that there's a mouse hole, and then you can see what they're up to, and there's quite a bit of activity again below the floorboards or below the roots. Next. And I decided to show you also the dancing. This is outside, and Tasha knew when mice could handle being outside and when they couldn't. So obviously they're keeping warm by dancing. Next. Also, she put a mouse into the envelope Next. And it's being very helpful, giving the paintbrush to that animal that is painting. Next. Even on the information that was on the back of the package, we have 2 mice showing how the calendar is going to stand on its own. Next. And this is a close-up. You can see a little bit of how Tasha shaded when she was working in ink, and this is more of a sketch, but it's a, you know, it's a little bit more of an informal look to show you how to open your calendar and keep it up. Next. Jenny Wren Press did a lovely Advent calendar, O Holy Night, that actually has been reproduced by Tasha Tudor and family. And there are mice in this. It's a different type of design. Next. So we have actually in the snow, but surrounded by leaves and apples, we have mice with their own plum pudding. Next. Want to give you the opportunity to see the mice behind the windows for the O Holy Night, including Happy Birthday, St. Nicholas. Tasha loves starting Christmas preparations on December 6th, the Feast of St. Nicholas. Next. Another Advent calendar was first designed to be a print for Corgi Cottage Industries in the late 1990s, is now available again as an Advent calendar. Another fine example of activity below the floorboards. Next. And the close-up shows you that for the new calendar, day number 25 is behind the mouse's Christmas tree. Next. And this is the design. I guess I should have said spoiler alert, sorry. And there are some mice there. Again, if you will remember, reverently looking upon the Christ child. Next. 1979, she did a book of Christmas, and it did contain an Advent calendar inside. But there are mice in some of the borders, and I'll leave it to you to see what you find on this one. Next. Well, didn't give you too long, did I? They're in the lower right, and they're dancing, and the bows now are on the necks. Next. And we have one at the left in a basket. Next. Running along the top of the twig border here, and this is for St. Lucia's Day. Next. And then 1988, Tasha decided to do an Advent calendar book where she talks about celebrating Christmas in Corgiville, which was her corgi's town, but also incorporating mice. Next. And this is one good example where they're lighting the candle. Next. Another where they're running. One mouse has, for whatever reason, planted the US flag inside the cornucopia, and the others are thinking, well, 2 are not too interested. They're looking at the candy canes, and what the activity is, one mouse is taking a truffle out of the cornucopia at the right, whereas the other mice are running towards the other cornucopia to see what's there. Next. And this is an upper illustration of the 2 mice on top of a box that people will notice as something that belongs in Tasha's kitchen. Next. Very musical animals here. And the mice are active again, running along, not quite dancing yet. Next. Christmas cards and back again. Tasha did illustrate some Christmas cards featuring mice, but in small ways. Next. There are 2 small, very small mice at the bottom in the middle of this very detailed 6-scene card. And this was one of what they call her square cards And this was done in the 1950s. Next. 1956, was called Dance in the Candlelight. And this was one of her first fantasy Christmas cards, and one of the few that featured a dancing animal. Next. The next year, 1957, same year she did Around the Year, there is one mouse that is awake and looking straight out at the viewer at the bottom. And I believe there is another mouse atop the sleeping fox, but I think they're separated by a root. So that mouse isn't in too much danger. Next. And there's a close-up of the mouse looking out while everyone else is sleeping. Next. In the 70s, Tasha did this lovely design, Gotta Love Her Blues, and there are some musical mice on the right. Next. Close-up of them. And again, they're definitely part of her woodland and animal scene here. Next. Corrieville Christmas, the last book that Tasha did, she made sure that mice were part of it. And there is one mouse on the front cover running along the glass bead chain with 3 cornucopias. Next. And this is the back cover. Interestingly enough, we only have one that the mouse is going after, and she did not color in the mouse here. Next. This is the title page. One of the reasons I wanted to show you this is because there are 2 mice either side of the scroll, but also the Tasha's lettering for Snow Before Christmas and Corrieville Christmas are not all that much different, especially if you look at her T's. Next. And this just gives you an idea of what mice were doing during the Christmas season in Corrieville. There's a mouse to the left of the flower sack. Next. And running along towards, they know that there are fresh donuts to be had. Next. And this is I love this scene. 2 mice decided it's just a little bit too busy for their taste, and they're leaving. And I imagine partly because there's a cat there as well. Next. And I wanted to include this because Tasha, as she got older, I think that her sense of color became even stronger. And I loved it when she did more impressionistic scenes. Certainly she still could do detail, but her shading and her use of color really came to the foreground, starting especially in 1990 with A Brighter Garden, an anthology of Emily Dickinson's poems. Next. And Corrieville Christmas couldn't be complete without mice on the mantle and in the stocking. Next. And that brings us back to Snow Before Christmas. This is the last page. And again, you can see one of her early Christmas trees. And the mice, well, they were just thinking of plum pudding crumbs and listening to the wind blowing over the hills and far away. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much. Do you want to take some questions now, or?
Sure.
We only got a few of them. There was one towards the beginning asking if the early publications were, if the lettering in the early publications was hand lettered.
Yes. As a matter of fact, if you look, she not only hand lettered the titles, she even hand lettered the dust jacket flap text, which I don't have an example of to show you here. But it was interesting to me that for her earliest, the Calico books in particular, the early Calico books, I should say, Hilda Scott was asked to do calligraphy starting with her tale for Easter, even though some of the hand lettering continued. But that's a good question and a good observation.
Thank you. We also just got a comment in from Rochester, enjoying seeing so many of Tasha Tudor's illustrations. Coincidentally, I just reread the Christmas section of The Wind in the Willows. Utterly delightful.
Well, hello, Rochester. Lived there for a while. Great place.
We got a question. Have you ever gone to New Hampshire?
Have I ever gone to New Hampshire? Yes. Is there more to that question?
Just as did Jeanette ever go to New Hampshire?
Yes. Yes.
I think that it might have been, maybe it was prompted by something that you had said about
sure.
collections that you had encountered or researched.
That may be. Yeah. I'm not sure exactly. I have seen Tasha Tudor's home in New Hampshire, as well as her mother's in Connecticut. I was very honored to be invited to visit Corgi Cottage. So, and I've been to New Hampshire for a number of times for other reasons. So, yes.
And then the last question is about your reference to Ned Hills. Carol Hint says, we met him at a shop in PA in 1975 when he told us he was the Saint Nick in the 1975 publication of The Night Before Christmas.
Yes. The 1962 miniature version is actually dedicated to EBH, Edward B. Hills. That's Ned Hills. He was extraordinarily proud to be a good friend of Tasha's, and the families were definitely close to each other. And I would say that there are some similarities, and yes, that he was an inspiration. I think he was an inspiration on many levels to Tasha. He was a professor of English. My mother corresponded with him. I had the opportunity to talk with him. He really respected and admired Tasha's work, and was a very, very strong advocate for people to get to know her work and her writing. And a lot of people have Ned Hills to thank for them being introduced to Tasha and for finding out how much work that she had done over the years.
We have a question or a request to share the names of your publications, and it's not specified whether publications by you or the ones that are referenced in here, but maybe there can be a clarification.
Okay. If it is asking about my publications, I have my first writings were in Martha Kidlet's newsletter, which was centered upon children's literature. There was a group in Connecticut called the American Book Collectors of Children's Literature, and I wrote some articles for them. I also wrote for Elaine Hollabaw's publication that was called The Letter. It was an anagram, but I wrote for that publication. And then I was fortunate enough to be invited to be co-curator of the Norman Rockwell Museum exhibition. And I wrote all the exhibition label text as well as the exhibition brochure text. And then my most recent publications have been for the Tasha Tudor Society's journal. And I'm very proud of the opportunity I have been given to write and research, a lot of research on a number of different subjects for the journal. And in terms of other publications, do you think it might have been other books or that?
Yeah, so the participant did clarify that it was asking about your publications.
Okay. Yeah. Mostly, I guess probably most of my work, I've done 11 different pieces for the journal.
And then I'm trying to find the slide, but there's a question about the Thumbelisa illustration, clarifying
Okay.
if it was in 1957. So I do
No,
maybe this is
Thumbelisa is from the 1945 Fairy Tales from Hans Christian Andersen. 1957, the only book that Tasha published was Around the Year. So maybe, I don't know if I misspoke or was misunderstood, but 1945 is the Fairy Tales book.
okay. Thanks for clarifying.
Sure.
That looks like all of the questions that have come in through the Q&A. If there are any more, I encourage you to put them in as I do a little closing. I just want to say thank you so much for this talk. I know working with the collections, a lot of these images and a lot of these books are not available online. So I love seeing that this work is being shared on such a wide audience, especially because the materials are accessible on site at our Parkway Central Library only at this time. So I really loved, especially, with each slide, trying to find the mouse in it before you started talking about it. So I really love the interactivity of it. And thank you so much for all of your work that you've done and for highlighting our collections. I just wanted to mention, even though we don't have a lot of work, I think we only have one item digitized of Tasha Tudor's in our digital collection. You did mention Beatrice Potter, and we do have a lot of her work in our rare book department. So anyone who is either local or planning a visit to Philadelphia, we encourage you to reach out to the specific collections. You can email clrc@freelibrary.org to set up a research appointment. And in advance, you can have materials pulled for you, and the curator of the collection will be available to help you in any of your research. We're getting.
I just say one thing just to clarify.
Mhm.
For my presentation, the only images I directly took from your collection was actually the original watercolor. And I invite everyone to see how extensive the collection is at the Free Library. Some of the items were from my personal collection, and so not everything is going to be available at the Free Library, but it's a wonderful place to start for those who have not had the opportunity to view a lot of Tasha Tudor in the past. And I would be happy to discuss with others perhaps some of the items that are not in the collection at this time.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. And again, sorry, my unfamiliarity with the collection.
No.
Going a little bit.
I've enjoyed, and thank you for everything that you've done today.
Yeah, and thank you for partnering with us and using our platform and our materials. And yep, hope everyone enjoys this season.
Thank
and
you.
If there aren't any other questions, we'll end and let everyone enjoy the rest of their weekend.
Yes, and Merry Christmas, everyone, and a Happy New Year.